In 1995, Red Lobster was the highest-grossing restaurant chain in America. Not McDonald's, not Burger King. Red Lobster. It had more revenue than any other sit-down restaurant on the planet. Families drove 40 minutes to get there. Teenagers worked summers to afford a date night. The waiting list on a Friday could run 2 hours and nobody complained, because waiting was part of the ritual. It was the place you went when something good happened. In May 2024, Red Lobster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 500 restaurants closed. Thousands of workers lost their jobs overnight. Locations were padlocked mid-shift. There were managers posting on Reddit that they found out from the news. Now, you probably have a theory about why this happened. Bad food, changing tastes, inflation, the pandemic, maybe endless shrimp. All of those things are in this story, but the people responsible for what happened to Red Lobster are almost certainly not who you think. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. This isn't just a seafood story. If you have ever eaten at a chain restaurant, shopped at a mall anchor store, bought shoes at a mid-range retailer, or filled a prescription at a national pharmacy, you are directly inside the system that killed Red Lobster. You are a participant in it whether you know it or not. At its peak, Red Lobster employed more than 500,000 people, 500,000 workers, servers, line cooks, dishwashers, managers, supply chain workers, lobster fishermen in Maine and Nova Scotia whose entire livelihoods were built around this one company's purchasing volume. The collapse didn't just erase a brand, it erased an economic ecosystem. And here is the detail I want you to hold in the back of your mind for the next several minutes, because we are going to return to it. In the same year Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy, its parent company reported record profits. Same year. Bankruptcy and record profits. I want you to remember that, because when we come back to it, the entire picture is going to shift. Red Lobster was founded in 1968 in Lakeland, Florida, by a man named Bill Darden. Darden had spent his life in the restaurant business, and he understood something that most people in the industry missed. There was an enormous gap in the American dining market between fast food and fine dining, and almost nobody was serving it well. He wanted to build something in that gap, affordable enough that a middle-class family could go without a special occasion, but nice enough that going felt like an occasion anyway. The first location opened on January 18, 1968. It was an immediate success. By the mid-1970s, General Mills had acquired the chain and began a period of aggressive national expansion. By the 1990s, Red Lobster had more than 700 locations across the United States and Canada. It was a genuine American institution. There are things about Red Lobster that become almost mythological when you talk to people who grew up going there. The Cheddar Bay biscuits, which were introduced in 1992 and became arguably more famous than anything on the actual menu. The lobster tank near the entrance. The birthday sing. The way the booths felt just slightly more formal than a regular Tuesday night warranted. Red Lobster was aspirational in a very specific, very American way. It wasn't a luxury you couldn't afford. It was a luxury you could afford, but only sometimes, which made it feel like a reward. That positioning, accessible but special, is genuinely difficult to execute, and Red Lobster did it for decades. In 1995, when the chain hit its revenue peak, it was owned by Darden Restaurants, the company that had spun off from General Mills. Darden ran Red Lobster alongside Olive Garden, and for a long time, both chains thrived. Then came 2014. Darden Restaurants, facing pressure from activist investors who believed the company was undervalued, made a decision that would eventually kill Red Lobster. They sold it. The buyer was Golden Gate Capital, a San Francisco-based private equity firm. The sale price was approximately $2.1 billion. Nobody at the time thought this was a big deal. Brands change hands. Companies restructure. Private equity acquires restaurant chains all the time. They were wrong. To understand what happened next, you need to understand how a leveraged buyout actually works, because the mechanics of it are almost never explained to the people most affected by it. When a private equity firm buys a company, they very rarely use their own money to do it. Instead, they use the target company's future earnings as collateral to borrow most of the purchase price. Then, and this is the critical part, they transfer that debt onto the company they just bought. Think about what that means in practice. On the day Golden Gate Capital's acquisition of Red Lobster closed, Red Lobster suddenly owed approximately $2 billion that it did not owe the day before. The company hadn't taken on any new projects. It hadn't expanded. It hadn't made a single bad business decision. It had simply been sold. And now it was carrying $2 billion of debt that existed purely to finance its own purchase. This is not unusual. This is the standard playbook. You have seen this movie before, even if you didn't recognize it at the time. Toys R Us was acquired in a leveraged buyout in 2005. It filed for bankruptcy in 2017. Sears was taken private by a private equity-backed CEO who then sold off its most valuable assets. It filed for bankruptcy in 2018. Payless ShoeSource went through not one but two private equity-related bankruptcy filings. The same pattern appears in healthcare systems, in media companies, in grocery chains. The debt load from a leveraged buyout isn't incidental to what happens afterward. It's structural. It determines everything. Every dollar a company earns that goes toward interest payments is a dollar that cannot go toward new equipment, employee wages, menu development, or weathering a bad quarter. The company is not being run. It is being drained. Everything I've told you so far is the part of this story that exists in the public record. It has been written about in business journals. It has been discussed in bankruptcy filings. If you know where to look, you can find all of it. What I'm about to show you is why this story is actually about something much bigger than Red Lobster, much bigger than private equity, and much bigger than the restaurant industry. Because the shrimp promotion, the real estate deal, and the bankruptcy itself are not three separate bad things that happen to one unlucky company. They are the same thing, seen from three different angles. Let's talk about the shrimp. In the summer of 2023, under new ownership by Thai Union, a massive seafood conglomerate that had acquired Red Lobster from Golden Gate Capital in 2020, the chain brought back its endless shrimp promotion and made it a permanent menu item. Endless shrimp had existed as a limited-time promotion for years. The model worked when it was temporary, because you could control volume and use it to drive traffic during slow periods. Making it permanent was a different calculation entirely. Internal projections reportedly estimated the promotion would cost around $20 million over the course of the year. The actual cost came in at approximately $31 million over that same period. An $11 million swing. Devastating for a company already carrying billions in debt obligations, but not, on its own, a company-killing number. Here is what made it worse. Red Lobster had a contractual obligation with its shrimp suppliers who were, in some cases, connected to Thai Union itself, to purchase a minimum volume of shrimp regardless of what happened with the promotion. So when the promotion lost money and they tried to scale it back, they were still on the hook for the supply costs. In the third quarter of 2023, Red Lobster reported an $11 million loss attributed directly to the endless shrimp promotion. 3 months later, they filed for bankruptcy. Now, remember the open loop I planted at the beginning. In the same year Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy, its parent company, Thai Union, reported record profits. Record profits. Thai Union's revenue hit approximately $4.3 billion in 2023. The shrimp that was losing money inside Red Lobster's financials was being sourced through supply chains that benefited Thai Union's other business units. The loss inside Red Lobster was, in some configurations, revenue somewhere else in the same corporate family. The restaurant was failing. The supply chain that fed it was thriving. But the shrimp promotion, as dramatic as it is not the deepest layer of this story. For that, we need to go back to 2014. Back to the sale. Because there was a part of that transaction that received almost no attention at the time and has received almost none since. Before Darden Restaurants sold Red Lobster to Golden Gate Capital, they did something else first. They sold the real estate. Red Lobster had spent decades owning the land and buildings where its restaurants sat. More than 700 locations. Premium real estate in high-traffic areas across the country. The kind of locations that chains spend decades accumulating because owning your real estate is one of the most significant forms of financial stability a retail or restaurant business can have. If you own the building, you can weather a bad year. If you own the building, your fixed costs are controllable. If you own the building, creditors can't pull the floor out from under you. In the year before the sale to Golden Gate Capital, 700-plus locations to a real estate investment trust, a REIT, for approximately $1.5 billion. The money went to Darden's shareholders. Darden investors received a special dividend. It was celebrated in the financial press as a savvy capital return move. And then Red Lobster, the operating company, the one that actually ran the restaurants, went from owning its locations to renting them, overnight. The new rent obligations were fixed. They had to be paid regardless of revenue, regardless of how many customers came through the door, regardless of whether there was a pandemic or a recession or a competitor that undercut you on price. In bankruptcy, you can negotiate with almost any creditor. You can restructure debt. You can renegotiate vendor contracts. You can close locations. But rent obligations tied to a REIT are some of the most difficult liabilities to shed in a bankruptcy proceeding. The leases had been structured to survive exactly this kind of restructuring attempt. And this is where I want you to stop and sit with a single sentence. The company wasn't mismanaged into bankruptcy. It was architecturally designed to be extractable. The real estate sale converted a stable, owned asset into a permanent cash obligation and sent $1.5 billion to Darden shareholders before the sale even closed. The leveraged buyout loaded the operating company with debt. The supply chain arrangements created contractual obligations that benefited entities upstream. And when the whole structure collapsed, the people holding the assets, the real estate, the supply contracts, the equity, were fine. The people holding the jobs were not. Here's what almost nobody connected at the time. The real estate sale, the leveraged buyout, and the supply chain arrangements were not separate decisions made by separate people for separate reasons. They were sequential steps in a value extraction process that is well documented in private equity academic literature, but almost never explained to the public in plain language. Step 1. Identify a company with valuable hidden assets, usually real estate, usually brand equity, usually stable cash flows from a loyal customer base. Step 2. Extract those assets through sale-leaseback arrangements, special dividends, or related party transactions before or immediately after acquisition. Step 3. Load the operating company with the debt used to finance those extractions. Step 4. Operate the company under conditions that prioritize short-term cash returns over long-term stability. Step 5. When the structure becomes unsustainable, file for bankruptcy, which legally separates the operating company from the entities that extracted value from it. The people who built this structure are not in bankruptcy. The REIT that owns the real estate is not in bankruptcy. The supply chain companies are not in bankruptcy. The private equity firms that designed the transaction walked away with their fees and their carried interest. And here is the forward implication that I think matters most. Right now, today, there are at least a dozen brands you eat at, shop at, or rely on that are currently inside some variation of this structure. Some of them are in Phase 2. Some are in Phase 4. The employees don't know. The customers don't know. In many cases, the local managers don't know. The structure is legal. It is well understood by the people who deploy it, and it is almost entirely invisible to everyone else. Red Lobster isn't a cautionary tale about bad management. It isn't a story about changing consumer tastes or shrimp prices or pandemic recovery curves. Red Lobster is a template. A template for how to take a profitable, stable, beloved institution, one that employed hundreds of thousands of people and served millions of families, and systematically convert it into a vehicle for transferring wealth upward until there is nothing left to transfer, and then walk away. The managers who locked the doors weren't the architects of this. The servers who lost their shifts weren't the beneficiaries. And the customers who drove 40 minutes for Cheddar Bay biscuits weren't the ones who got the dividend check. The next time you read a headline about a chain closing, a retailer going bankrupt, a brand you grew up with suddenly gone, don't ask who managed it badly. Ask who owned the real estate. Ask who held the supply contracts. Ask who got the special dividend. Because somewhere right now, the same playbook is open to a fresh page. The company is one you'd recognize immediately, and the timeline is shorter than you think.